Now we have seen the basic MySQL configuration. Here I'm defining the node server. I'm creating the node server which is going to hold the REST API for the entire application. So let's begin with the folder structure. I'm going to add a folder separately for our server application. So I'm going to say new folder, and this I name as eStore server. So eStore is containing the client side application and eStore server is going to contain the server side application. So in the e-commerce folder, we have these two folders now. So to begin with Node.js, you have to download and install. So you can check my YouTube video. This is the link for how to configure the Node.js. Once it is installed, now let's begin with the project. The command I'm going to try is npm init. And I press enter, and this is going to ask me a few questions. So it says what is the package name. So I'm going to press enter itself. So it is going to take the default value, that is the folder name itself. So the package name will be eStore server. The version if I have to define. So I'm not going to answer any of these questions as I believe that I want to go with the default values. So I can keep on pressing enter, or if you want you can add a value as well. So once we are done with all these settings, it will ask you that are you sure about these settings. You can say again enter to confirm it, and you see that there is a package.json file created. Let me also remind you that if you do not want to answer all the questions, you can try npm init-y. If you do that, means by default all the answers are considered as yes. Alright, so now we have the package.json ready. Now there are few other packages we need to install for this project. So I'm going to say yarn add Express, which is going to help me to create the REST APIs. So Express is needed. Also, I'll need the few middlewares like body parser, which will help me to parse the data which is received. Then there is one more package, CORS, that is cross origin resource sharing. There is one type of issue which we will see when we proceed with our server application. We also need to install MySQL related drivers. So I'm going to say MySQL, and also there is also one more package, MySQL named params escape. This is also needed. This package is very helpful when you have a larger queries and you want to parameterize the values. So let me install all these packages together. I'll press enter. Alright, so now we are done with the installation. Now I'm going to create the index.js. This is going to be the entry point for the entire server application. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the Express framework with the require statement. So I'll say require Express. And then I'm going to create an app object. This is a normal syntax for using the Express. So I'll say app is equal to Express. Now I'm going to create the server. So there will be a port. The port can also be dynamic, which we will see at a later stage. So const server I'm going to create, and app.listen. The port number you define on which it has to listen, and there will be a callback function which will display a message once the server is started. So I'm going to say console log, and I'll say app is running or server is running, whatever you want to write, is running on port, and the port which we have port, the capital constant we have defined. Now if you want to check, we can just run this application. I can say node and the index file. So it says that app is running, though I have not yet defined any routes in it. So now that's going to be the next step. So now let's define routes also. So I'll say routes here, a folder in which I'm going to define separate file for individual routes. So first I'm going to say product.js. Here also I'm going to import the Express. Now I'm going to define product.get. Assume that we are going to have get categories route. So let's have an arrow function here, which will have request and response. Now I'm going to say let app data. This is going to be an empty object literal, which will have data from the database eventually. Alright, so now here I'm going to define one key, that is whether there is any error or not, and the data, which is going to be an array. And I'm going to send the status with 204 value and also the JSON data. So this is the success along with the data itself. So when the get request to the get category is executed, this is how it is going to return the value. Now in the main file, that is the index.js, we need to import the route which we have created. So I'm going to say product require. Now to load the route, I'm going to use the use statement. So I'll say app.use product API. This is the endpoint we are going to create. Now let me stop the server and run this again. I missed to export the object. So let's say module.exports. I'll say product. Let's save this. Again, go back to prompt and run the index.js. So now the app is running. Now let's check whether the route is working or not. So I'm going to open it in the browser. Let's say localhost 5000 and get categories. Let's press enter here in the browser. So you see that the data is getting returned by the response object. Now let's integrate MySQL. That is, we want to connect with MySQL. So now let's create a data object. The model data we are going to keep here. So I'll say database, and inside this I'm going to again create a file. This I'm going to keep index.js. Now here I'm going to define the connection related information. So I'll say const MySQL is equal to require. MySQL is the driver which I'm going to import. And now I'm going to define the connection details. So I'll say const connection. MySQL object has a method called createPool, which again has an object literal as a parameter, in which I'm going to define various keys here. You define the username, the password, we have already created the database eStore. Alright, now let's export this module with the connection object. Now let's go to product.js. Here we are going to import the index file of database. So I'll simply say require. By default, the index file will be considered. Now we are going to connect with the database. This will have a callback function. If there is any error, then we can define some error structure here. So I'll say app data is error is true. And we are going to send the error in the data. So the status will be 500 and app data will be sent to the client. If there is no issue, then we are going to run the query. We are going to fetch the data and that we will return. So I'll say connection.query. The query we are going to make is the select statement. The table we have is category, so I'm going to get all the records. So if there is any error, then again we can repeat this. Otherwise, the data which is retrieved, that we can update with the rows parameter, and we can say response.status because it's a success 200, and the data we are going to send back. Now let's go to the browser and again make the request to the same route. Alright, so this is the error which is getting displayed due to some reason. The main reason behind this is there is a password, that is authentication policy in MySQL, where it forces me to have the strong password. Now either you change the password and you can avoid these kind of issues, or I can just change the policy. So I'll go back to this policy and change it to an option where the weak passwords are also allowed, like this. Let me just say next. And I proceed further. So now this is updated for the weak passwords as well. Now let's go back to the browser and we press enter again to see whether it's working or not. And now you see that the data is retrieved. The data which we have here now is being fetched from the table we created, that is the categories table. So now in this section we have seen that how can we create an API endpoint, though there are very few validations, but still this is a working API, and this API is being called from the browser itself. In the next section we are going to see how we can call this API endpoint from our client side, that is the React application.